And Guidry goes, let's go look at something that took place 40 years ago. Who cares? Okay, that's political.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever it is in the world and whenever it is that you are watching us. On behalf of International Broadcast Media, IBM Television, welcome to The Lawyer's Den. I'm William Tresvant, and I am your host for this evening, at least this hour. First, it's always my honor, and I love this part of the show. It's part of my probably one of my most favorite pieces, and that's I get to introduce a man of quite the stature. First of all, hailing to us from the great state of Florida, he in fact is a former three-time chess champion for the entire state of Florida, having attained the title of chess champion before the age of 21. After that, he went on to great glory, obtaining his MBA, his JD, and an LLM, which is a legal degree that allows you to teach. And in fact, he did teach. He indeed was a professor. I'm not sure many of our people in our audience understand that Nick Calavita, in fact, was a professor. Thereafter, for 10 years, he has gone on and become a media mogul, a leader in finance, and he's also my erstwhile friend, my colleague, Nick. Nick, where are you in the world? Nick,
I'm here. Which is a bit of a miracle, but that's another story. And I just forgot this is a live presentation, right? So I had to show up.
Kind of,
Okay. Well, the good news is we also have some very lively people here today,
yes,
and we're going to bring them in. First of all, this gentleman actually is a graduate of BYU. Received his law degree and also a master's in laws at George Washington, and also right now is the assistant attorney general for constitutional issues at the state of Utah. Let's bring in one of our favorites on Lawyer's Den. It's Jeff Tiger. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Okay. Thank you. I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, I'm glad Utah is still standing and the buildings are still standing behind you. Okay, no earthquakes. Now,
not yet.
Okay. This person actually hails from the university, actually from Lithuania, and then went to the University of Denver School of Law. And at University of Denver School of Law, she actually received her Juris Doctorate and her master's in law, and it got admitted to the bar, and then is admitted to the bar now in Florida because she's smart rather than stay in the cold. She went to Florida to practice law. Let's bring in Guidry Stansonite. Guidry, welcome to the show. The class of our act. Class act. Okay. Now that we have a good panel here, we got to juice it up a little bit.
Okay.
And there's no more juice than the juice who went to this university. The juice went to the University of Southern California. So did this guy. This guy also. So they have something in common. But we'll talk about that later. Then he went to the Ohio State University, not Ohio State University, shuffled off to Alabama, showing he was a very confused man, and then went on to New York University, received his master's, and it was a teaching degree. So he teaches actually at Georgia College. Let's bring our professor in, Adam Lamparero. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
By the way, his CV, he writes all these articles. You ever see his bio? I don't know where he has the time to sleep. I mean, he's writing all these articles. I just go, ugh. Okay, but anyway, the thing is, if you ever want to read them, go ahead. Google them and read all his crazy articles. Okay, but now this next gentleman actually brings some sanity. Okay, knowing where he is, knowing where he wants to go. This guy went to Fordham University and then went to the State University of New York at Buffalo, where he received his law degree. Then went on to practice law in the big banana itself, New York City. Let's bring in our street fighter, Fernando Leal. Fernando, welcome to the show.
Hey, everybody. Glad to be back.
Yes. When he says that, you never know if lawyers are telling the truth or not. Notice he said, glad to be back. Okay, we don't know. And, of course, we have our erstwhile den master, who also went to Fordham University and the State University of New York at Buffalo. Let's give a warm welcome to Bill Tresvant, the den master. Okay, Bill. Now the thing is, we need a subject matter expert to let us know what we're talking about today. And so, Bill, who's the subject matter expert, what are you talking about today?
Okay, well, actually, today's going to be a bit of an interesting one for our audience, and I hope you bear with us because we have a bit of a surprise. First of all, the topic we're talking about is reparations, and it's Black reparations in particular, whether or not it's owed, who it's owed to, who should pay, and we're going to talk about all of that tonight with all of our guests. Now, as part of our rotational effort here, my colleagues have elected me to present the subject matter briefing for the beginning of the show. And so, Nick, if you guys will remain, because I now sit in the seat as subject matter expert, but I am exposed to any and all clarifying questions that any of you may have to make sure that I have my briefing correct so that our audience is on point. And without further ado, I will just move right in. Essentially, as we know, it's people say Black reparations, and we just don't know what it is. So I'll just begin with the definition of reparations. And definition of reparations generally means to repair, to compensate for previous wrongdoing. And normally we think about it in terms of, say, a personal injury case where you're in a car accident, you suffered an injury, and then you go to court, you sue, and then you get some money to compensate for the injuries and any other consequences as a result of that accident. It's the same concept here with reparations, except it's Black reparations in terms of what debt is owed, what monies are owed to African Americans or Black Americans. Now, with that in mind, here's the case that they make. They make that, in fact, beginning in 1619, for 400 years, the wealth of this nation was created on the backs of the uncompensated labor of of Africans who were brought to this country and put in the institution of slavery. Thereafter, once slavery was abolished, we suffered from Jim Crow laws. In that regard, it spread out institutionally through government, through private sector policies, as well as educational policies. So much so that when they did an estimate, as of today, they estimate that the total cost of the amount of money due to compensate for the 400 years of oppression and slavery is anywhere between the numbers of 10 trillion to $12 trillion. Now, with that in mind, what's occurred over the years is that this argument over Black reparations they pointed to essentially this argument that it's been true for other groups historically. For example, at least here in the United States, under the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, signed into law under President Ronald Reagan, Japanese Americans received reparations for the unlawful internment of them during World War II. Additionally, under the Alaskan Native Claims Settlement Act, the federal government transferred land, federal money, and an ongoing dedicated portion of oil revenues to Native Alaskans. More importantly, through an apology resolution in 1993, the United States government actually apologized for the overthrowing of the Kingdom of Hawaii. And in addition, at some state levels, the state of Virginia established a compensation fund for victims who were involuntarily sterilized, and they established that fund in 2015. So the case for reparations for Black Americans has some precedent, and it exists through. But there's an argument that it should continue into the private sector as well as the government and private business. And the precedent for this deals with what we've seen with regard to reparations, for example, with Jewish people around the globe, with regard to reparations for the Holocaust. So there has been a long-standing agreement between Israel and West Germany for reparations, monetary reparations for the injuries due to the Holocaust. In addition, there is an agreement between the Jewish Conference on material claims in which Jews are able to go back and reclaim their property, their jewelry, their paintings, and things of that nature that were stolen by the Nazis during the same period of time. So all of this leads to a head. Now, you say to yourself, well, what are people saying on the other side of this argument? Because that's the case really for reparations. There's been an injury, all of this money, people work without compensation, and there's a debt owed to them. Now comes the rub. The argument says essentially this: why should I pay? I didn't do it. You have modern day Americans say that was 400 years ago. That was somebody else. It wasn't my family. It wasn't me. So why do I have to pay? One, two. Another group school of thought says, listen, the problem's too big. When you start talking in terms of $10 trillion to $12 trillion, that where's the money going to come from? You can't possibly figure it out. Another argument simply says, and this is the legal argument, it says, listen, the statute of limitations has run, which means if you were going to have any kind of claim for any kind of injury for which you were owed a debt, it's too late because you should have filed it 400 years ago. There is an additional school of thought out there, and we're going to be debating all of this because we do not shy away from it. And there's one school of thought out there that says, well, I don't know why, or we don't know why African Americans are all upset because after all, they got affirmative action and Barack Obama was elected president. So therefore, we're all good now. So let's just think about it and move forward. So with that in mind, there is one other intriguing thing. In the past, there's been a distinct trend towards paying reparations, and we found this to be true in the private sector as well as educational institutions. Georgetown University has set up a fund to grant scholarships to compensate for the descendants of the 272 slaves that they sold in people that they owned that they sold down the river, literally down south, down the river, to keep Georgetown University afloat. Princeton Theological Seminary in 2019 established a fund for $27 million to deal with any of the legacies resulting from its involvement in slavery, as well as the private institutions of Wachovia and J.P. Morgan. So with that, we have the stage set. One, should we pay? Is there a debt owed? If there is a debt owed, who should get paid? How should they get paid? And more importantly, why are we even talking about it? Now, with that, Nick, I hand it over to you. But, Nick, there's one other thing that we are going to do this evening as a bit of a twist, and I hope you're ready. Nick, are you ready?
Always ready. What were you doing?
Okay, Nick, I'm taking off my host hat and handing it over to you. Tonight, I want to be a panelist. So, Nick,
Oh, Lord.
It's your show. So you are running the board. It is your show, and by all means, have at it because
Oh, man.
I cannot stay out.
I wasn't prepared for this, but I'm perfectly capable. So let's bring in our first panelist, Jeff Teichert. Jeff, we're going to ask you. We've heard from our esteemed counsel, if I can use that. Let's see, Bill Trezevant. But let's hear from you, Jeff. What are your thoughts about this reparations deal that your esteemed counsel from Washington, D.C. is talking about? Just a minute. All right, you're good. You're good. We can hear you.
I think Bill did a good job of laying out the issues and the way it's currently being debated. I have a couple of problems with the idea of reparations, but I would begin by saying, as fate would have it, today I had a chance to attend a CLE course where one of the speakers was Janetta Williams of the NAACP. And so I had the opportunity to ask her where the NAACP sits on reparations. And she said that in the past, they have supported congressional action for reparations that was proposed by Representative John Conyers. Now, he's deceased now, no longer is there. But she believes the NAACP would still be for that. Here's the issue that I have with it, though. If you go back into my history, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I had ancestors who were pioneers. You may or may not know about the Hans Mill massacre in Missouri, where 19 people were shot to death by a mob of Missourians. They were harassed so much in Missouri, even the governor issued an extermination order against the Mormons that they said they must be either exterminated or driven from the state. Well, so my great several greats back, Lindsay Anderson Brady, had to leave Missouri, and then he had to leave Nauvoo, Illinois. When he left Nauvoo, he sold his brick home and his farm for 2 flat irons and a bushel of potatoes. Obviously not a very fair exchange. Now, I want reparations for that. Not really, I don't. But you know, the church and the NAACP have done some significant work lately. And Amos Brown, who is on the national board of the NAACP, has called President Russell M. Nelson, the president of my church, his brother by another mother. And they've done a lot of work together. In fact, Reverend Brown says that "We Shall Overcome," the anthem of the civil rights movement, has a lot in common with "Come, Come Ye Saints," which is sort of the anthem of the Mormon pioneers. So point is, you could, if we all reach back far enough, most of us, if not all of us, could come up with someone who was persecuted in our background. And I just think hopefully we've come too far as a country at this point to keep trying to go back and right old wrongs. I mean, we've been talking about reparations since there was 40 acres and a mule. And at some point, when does it end?
And that's an absolute good question. So we need somebody to come up with an answer on that, Jeff. And we're going to bring in Guidry and ask her what her thoughts are on that. You come from Lithuania, and all of a sudden now you're in the United States and you're getting these reparations arguments. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that Jeff pointed it correctly, that every single group of people, whether it is nationality, religion, class, would have certain struggle that could cause or could justify attempt to get reparations. Yet, when we talk about slavery, the mass of it, the size of it, and still the effect of it is daily visible. And I would not agree with Jeff. I think that reparations are needed. I think they should be done not on federal level. I think they should be done on municipal level, local level. I think that country is getting ready for that. We were not ready. It should not be comfortable. Nation never wanted, if you look at the history, pay any reparations. Yet there needs to be certain push, and some people need to stand up.
Well, it looks like we lost Guidry, and she was doing a good job. So let's go to some of the shy parts of our panel. Let's bring in Adam Lamparero. What are your thoughts on reparations? And we'll wait for Guidry to come back.
Well, I'd like to know, why aren't we talking about reparations for people who are gay, who have been discriminated against? Why aren't we talking about reparations for Vietnam vets who were spit on when they came home? Why aren't we talking for reparations for mentally ill people who have been stigmatized for centuries? This conversation is ridiculous. African Americans are already getting reparations through affirmative action. If you apply to be an undergraduate student at a university or a professor at any other school, you are given extra points and bias in your favor. That is a fact. But the real thing that nobody wants to talk about is that what would reparations really do, given that 73% of African American children grow up in single-parent households? Given that African Americans commit 50% of the crimes, even though they're only 13% of the population, given that delinquency and dropout rates are so high. Until we address those issues, there will never be equal opportunity and certainly not equal outcomes. But no one wants to talk about that. And that's the problem here.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm glad you're coming out of your cocoon and being a little less shy. And next time,
it's courage to speak the truth, Nick.
Well, that's good. Well, we got another true speaker here. Let's bring in Fernando Leal. Let's see what he thinks about reparations.
Hey, Nick.
Yeah,
that's a big no. They already have their hands in my pocket for welfare, public housing, Medicaid, Medicare, food stamps, and the rest. The truth of the matter is, this is all going to depend on which way we're taking this discussion. If we're going to talk about slaves, then it's a definite hard no on my end. The fact is that Bill breaks up the point of tort law, so we're going to have to show that there was a duty, a breach of that duty, an injury, and damages flowing from that injury. At the time that slavery was around, it was legal. We aren't going to be able to show a duty or breach of duty. I didn't employ any of these people, so I didn't reap any benefits from their employment, so why should I be paying any salary that they have? And more importantly, none of them are around. Bill brings up the point that we have reparations for the Japanese for the 1988 act that President Reagan passed, but that act gave them $20,000, and they had to be people who were actually interned and alive at the time that the act was passed. So there's a nexus, there is a connection. He also brought up the Holocaust survivors. a lot of those payments were also for people who were actually interned and suffered a loss. Now, it gets a little bit more complicated because they did have money set aside for wrongful death claims, and there's a body that administers the money. He brings up the property issues. Again, a direct nexus. If we're going to take this in the direction of, let's say, what happened in Greenwood, Tulsa, Oklahoma, what was known as Black Wall Street, then the answer may be maybe, because it all depends on if we're going to be giving reparations to people that were there when this happened, or children that were living in their homes and lost their homes that maybe they would have inherited, or if we're going to talk about Manhattan Beach, California, where I think they're called the Bruces. I don't remember the family name, where they started a Black resort. And because there was a bunch of racists that moved in and they didn't want to have them there, they got the city council to make believe they were going to create a park and condemn the property under eminent domain, and didn't do anything until the 1960s, 50s, when a gentleman decided to write his thesis on the area. Then that's when the city council said, hey, let's turn this into a beach because there might be legal ramifications. Again, in these cases, there are connections. There's a direct nexus. In the issue where you're talking about slaves, unless you can find me a person that was a slave back in the 1860s or a sharecropper up until the 1930s that's still around today that didn't get paid for their work, the answer is no.
Okay, now we're going to bring in for opening statements. We're going to bring back Guidry. Guidry, somehow the computer shut you off, but and it shut off again. I'll have to bring you back on here. Here we go. We'll bring you back on. Okay, opening statement.
I think computer didn't like where I was going with what I was saying, but what I'm saying that I am pro reparations, but not vague reparations, not cash reparations, not for everyone. What I am pro, I'm actually would like to mention an example to what happened in 2018, Evanston, Illinois. It was the first local city that approved the reparations for its Black citizens. And how they did it legally and logically. And as Fernando said, they found nexus to the damage that was in line with the injury and the addressability of that injury. So first, what they did, the city analyzed its archives. They needed to really demonstrate that there was discrimination that disadvantaged Black population. Primarily, they looked at the housing. A lot of Black people who lived in Evanston at that time during 1919 to 1969, up until the Fair Housing Act was enacted, were disproportionately kicked out from different cities, different places in the city, except for one area. And that affected their living ability and their growth, economic, financial ability to this day. Second, what they needed to do, they needed to find the directly affected people harmed by the policies that were discriminatory policies, redlining, crazy loaning institutions that were incorporated and exercised by the city. So that's why they identified that direct people who lived in that city during that time, 1919 to 1969, or their direct descendants, were authorized to ask for those compensations. And then what happened? The city needed to figure out how to get the money, where to get the funding from. And the city figured out that at that point they had tax for marijuana. So they calculated that they could use the income from the tax to compensate, to create those payments for the people who were directly affected. Then the city voted. So they decided that in a period of 10 years, they will pay $10 million for those people, direct descendants or people who lived during that time and were directly affected by those discriminatory policies. And they also decided that the payment cannot be in cash. That's a very, very, very important point. The city decided that, again, this payment, the compensation, has to be directly connected to the harm. So what they did, they incorporated the housing plan, giving a housing credit of $25,000 for appropriate individual, whether to apply for mortgage or use it for the existing house. And I think that's wonderful because they directly affecting the economy of the city. They helping the population that was historically harmed and that is proven that was harmed. And I think that all the exercise like this would be very legitimate and needed in the United States to be followed by other similar cities.
Well, thank you. We've listened to opening remarks from councils, and I see we're going to bring everybody back because it looks like we have total agreement for a change in the lawyer's den.
No.
So the issue we have before us is, should blacks be allowed reparations for past harms?
Can I throw my first flag?
Well, can we stop you? No, I guess we can't. So you're up, Adam.
This discussion is ridiculous. Let's be very clear. We already have a welfare state. We have affirmative action that benefits African Americans at the university and hiring level in all aspects of government. What no one wants to talk about is that 73% of African American children grow up in single parent families and poverty. 50% of African Americans commit murders, even though being only 13%. 50% of the murders are committed by only 13% of the population, that being African Americans. So what the Democrats are doing is reinforcing a victimhood mentality that has not served them in the past and that will not serve them in the future. The key is to reform communities and black culture. And nobody wants to talk about that because they're afraid of being called a racist. Well, I'm not a racist, but I believe in the truth. And not a single thing that Guidry said spoke to that. So let's talk about the real issues if we're going to talk about real progress.
Any more red flags? You have one, Bill?
No, I'm not throwing a red flag. I'm waiting for you to call on me because we were not in.
I already. Everybody had opening statements, so now it's time to scrum here, baby.
Actually, I was the SME, but now I'm just going to go straight to arguments here.
Do you want to go to arguments?
Yeah. Well, no, because I didn't even get an opening statement. Let's just go right down the line, just like I outlined at the very beginning. It's simply two camps now. It's like, one, we don't want to pay. Why should we have to pay? And that's just morally wrong because all you're doing, we as a nation, is ducking our historical moral responsibility. And all these arguments simply say, we can't do it. But America has always found a way when it wants to cure a wrong to find a solution. For example, completely unrelated and unbeknownst and nobody's fault, we had 9/11. What did we suddenly have? America got together and we had a compensation fund for the victims of 9/11. Why? Because we knew that those individuals were wrong, they needed to be repaired, and that we as a nation are the only ones that could step in and to make that happen. Now, what we have is we have the original sin of slavery and everything else of that is followed from that, including the single largest massive example of intergenerational theft in this nation. We're talking 10 to 12 trillion dollars, and Adam is over there saying, well, we need better schools. Well, the point, Adam, that where you're mistaken is simply this: the indicia that you just pointed out is the exact the symptoms. It's the evidence of the root cause. They were deprived, their parents were deprived, and their great-grandparents were deprived, all because of the original sin of slavery. So now they are in substandard. Their parents were denied an education, couldn't build a wealth. Their grandparents have done the same. Now they sit there and you say, oh, well, poor little them, let's just give them stuff. And by the way, they have affirmative action. What about the 400 years of free labor that white Americans in this nation benefited from and then transferred that wealth down?
There you go with that victimhood mentality. So you're telling
my red flag. Red flag. Now, when we go to the issue of when it comes to reparations, in no other circumstance in American history have we said if we have agreed to right a wrong, that is reparations, pay for wrongdoing that was sanctioned by this nation, our nation, because we take the good and the bad. Nowhere have we said, okay, well, we're going to give you this payment, but now we're going to tell you how you get to spend it. Now, Fernando, if you tell me in any one of your entire experience as an attorney in any of your personal injury cases, when you have obtained a significant award for one of your clients, has that award ever come with strings dictating to your client, who was a successful client, how they could pay, how they could distribute that money, what they could do with that money? So any restrictions, so one, reparations are owed. Two, any restrictions about a nexus, about anything else, about what they can do, where it should go, is completely outrageous. It's never been done before, and it's never been subjected on any other group. And more importantly, the issue here is fundamentally there is a moral authenticity to this sin. It is
Okay.
wrong. It's never been corrected. And Jeff, I love you dearly. I really do, and I respect your intellectual honesty. But herein lies the rub of your argument. When you say, well, it's been too long, and when is enough is enough. We've been talking about reparations for years. The reason we've been talking about reparations ever since 40 Acres and a Mule is because it wasn't paid back then. And you cannot take the legitimate logical position that says, well, people have been asking for it and have been raising it, and the oppressor has been ignoring the argument for 400 years. Well, now it's been 400 years. No, you don't get to win the argument simply because you've delayed the question. And therein lies the fallacy of the argument. So it becomes two things. Was there a wrong? And yes, there was. We see it everywhere. There is absolutely no doubt about it. It is one of the most significant harms in human history. So the question becomes, when do we get paid? How is it going to be done? And whether or not, and you cannot say, well, it's too late, or it's too big, or it's been too long, because that is patently unfair. Black Americans are owed reparation. Now, we can debate the size and the scope and who gets paid, whether it's immigrants, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the fundamental moral responsibility of this nation, it's the one that we inherited, that we are going to lead. Now, I understand when we come and we say here in the lawyers' den that there are technicalities, statute of limitations, articles. We have to discreetly divide it to include and address specific harms. But nowhere in America, when we are, as a great nation, when we have had to meet a historical obligation, have we ever let the law stop us from doing what is right. In fact, it's been our legal imagination to creatively address the injustice that was done. And we can simply pass a law and take care of all of the technicalities. I hand it back to you, Nick.
I'm going to send it to the first person you called on was Fernando, and see if Fernando's in total agreement with your statement. So Fernando, we're going to let you have the floor on this one. And I believe your ancestors came from Cuba, and of course, they handed you piles of money, your grandparents piles of money before you came over here. Is that correct?
Yeah, the piles of money with the Cuban government, who took all of our houses, our homes, our accounts, and everything else. And, Bill, tell me, what is the free labor that you've produced in the last 400 years? The answer is zero. You get paid for everything that you do. So I don't see how you're going to sit here and tell me that Black Americans are putting forth free labor. Nobody currently is putting forth any free labor. As a matter of fact, a lot of them aren't putting forth any labor at all because they're sitting at home living off my tax money. So right there, you're already getting your reparations. Next, you're talking about my clients who get money from personal injury suits. Guess what? Some of them do have strings attached because they go into an annuity and they don't see the money for 20 some odd years. The fact is that you can't sit here and prove damages unless you find me a slave that has actually lost money for the work that they did for free. When you can find me that, go right at it. And at that point, I'm not done. At that point, the person that owes you the money is the person that enslaved you. I didn't enslave you. I don't owe you a penny. As a matter of fact, I didn't even want to buy you lunch when we were in college. How in hell you think I'm going to pay you reparations now? All right.
Well, that's a good question. But you also called on Jeff Teichert, so you mentioned him by name. Let's bring Jeff. You get the floor. What are your thoughts, Jeff? We need to unmute you just a minute. There we go. You're good.
I respect the integrity of Bill's argument as well, and I am sympathetic to it. But there are a couple of problems. First, when we talk about the technical legal problems, who actually qualifies as Black? Does Barack Obama qualify? I mean, he's wildly successful beyond any of us, and he also didn't have any ancestors in slavery. So is he going to get reparations because he happens to be an African American? I think that would be grossly unfair. I mean, even Bill himself probably has more money than I do, successful lawyer and all that. And why are we going to pay Bill reparations? This country's been pretty good to him from what I know. And I could cite a zillion other examples. Herman Cain, Clarence Thomas, do they and their kids deserve reparations for a wrong that was done hundreds of years ago? And it was a wrong. I don't dispute that. And I don't dispute that that Blacks got off to a poor start in this country because of it. But where do we end the vengeance for that? I think the talk of reparations is divisive. Now, I also want to say, I want our country to become wealthy enough that everybody, regardless of race, has a chance to succeed and do really well. And, we're not there yet, but that's what I would like to see. And I look at what the Reverend Martin Luther King used to do during his career. If he didn't think that Black people were sanitation workers, whatever, were being paid fairly, what did he do? He organized a boycott and said, hey, we Black Americans are, if we were a country, would be like the 10th biggest economy in the world or something like that. And he said, we might be poor individually, but together we've got a lot and we can exert influence. And they did. And I think he did a lot of good that way, but it wasn't by demanding reparations. It was by demanding fairness here and now. Now, I will tell you who I think ought to be demanding reparations. It's all the Black people that were affected by the Clinton crime bill, which disproportionately punished the use of crack cocaine as opposed to powder cocaine, which we know is no different, and put a lot of Black men in prison for years. And that was Bill Clinton. And you know who led the fight for that in the Senate? None other than our current president, Joe Biden.
Fine. And Jeff,
those people were affected by a legitimate wrong. So a lot of those people are still alive. Those are the ones who ought to be demanding reparations. Finally, I agree with Adam in the sense that I think the biggest problem in the Black community is fatherless homes. I also think the biggest problem in the white community is fatherless homes, to be quite honest with you. And so that is I think that's the biggest social problem in America today. I think we need to address it. I think Lyndon Johnson's Great Society didn't do the people that it purported to serve any favors. I think it encouraged fathers to be out of the home. And, clear back at the time it was passed, Pat Moynihan was suggesting that we were going in the wrong direction that way. And I think we have. I think we've gotten to a very bad place when it comes to the nuclear family. So how we solve that politically, I think that's tough.
Let's go to the class of this class. Let's go to Guidry because we haven't heard from her in a while and get her thoughts on that now that she got to listen to arguments from our esteemed counsel. Guidry.
Well, thank you. Bill mentioned a blanket solution for such a complex issue of the society, and I would never believe in a blanket solution. So I don't think that's the way to go. I think we have to be realistic. There are a few issues. One of the issues of giving everyone money and letting everyone to spend money how they feel like it is the enforceability. If we start with municipal level, the state granting money has to connect that money to the harm that state did and now wants to eliminate or address. The other solution, the other point that I would want to mention, and I want to take us back to Evanston in Illinois, the example that I mentioned about that took place in 2018. Based on the research, before city issued those reparations, they also determined that yes, in the past there were discriminatory conduct, and currently they found that there were direct effects of that discrimination. They found that, for example, the average house income was between Black and white differed by $46,000. They found that there was a informational achievement gap. They found that there was a huge difference between home ownership, and that's who they decided. They connected what they need to do, how to fix it, which directly takes me to the Adam's point that, the biggest problem is to have single parents, and Jeff's point, and in even both races. One of the primary reasons why families separate is monetary problems. So if we decide and if we try to address or educate people or tell how to spend certain money to have a better basis for their well-being, such as housing, I think that would be part of the solution, and maybe we should really look into that, especially when discriminatory practices up to 1968 were very promulgated by the unfair housing practices.
Right. And the issue before this court is
No.
Can I say
should
something?
blacks be allowed reparations for past harms? I believe we have a red flag
I'm
from
bringing a challenge, a flag. I'm
from
exercising.
Bill Trezevant. You're up.
Look, I'm going to make this a drive-by hit legally, okay, by way of the arguments. First of all, and this is just a minor point, but I just can't help myself. It turns out that President Obama did have a slave ancestor here in America, except it was on his mother's side. Most people just think of his father, but that's more of a footnote. I think the issue is rather this, is that with all due respect to my colleagues, they're looking at the solution and the situation in the same paternalistic way that slavery and Jim Crow laws were administered. They're looking at it in terms of, well, can we connect this issue, or we have to moderate that issue, or we have to manage this, or somehow do something else. Look, here's the evidence. There is a wealth gap between white America and black America. That is a direct result of the intergenerational theft of wealth. When you deprive a great-great-grandfather of an education, and then that gentleman and his family cannot provide an education to the next generation, and then that next generation cannot do the same. That is the theft of wealth over time. And while those people were working for free, and then when they came out less educated, they couldn't get the same jobs. That is the theft. Now, it's a specious argument to then say that somewhere down the line, because some other child down the line has achieved, that therefore that's proof that it's all okay. It's not all okay. And you can't point to select positive results and say that that vitiates all of the harm that was done before. So here we have everybody lamenting in a paternalistic way, the lack of fathers in our household, the poor educational system. Oh, well, they were redlined in their housing. How about the insurance that they were overcharged for? How about the fact that they were overcharged banking fees for over 400 years? How about the Jim Crow laws? All of those are indicia because this problem was institutionalized by the federal, the state, the local government, institutionalized by private sector. Wachovia apologized. J.P. Morgan apologized. Georgetown University apologized. Princeton University apologized. They're beginning to set aside money because you know what they know? They know that deep in our heart and in this nation, we are an optimistic nation. That when we realize that we will actually get to work and right the wrongs that we have, because that, in fact, is the American way. Now, I get when, everybody comes to the table and says, well, there's this issue, there's that issue. And what they do is they complicate the issue by questioning it to death. Oh, we can't move because we've got to analyze it more. Well, maybe it should be this solution or maybe it should be that solution. And Adam, I am pulling a line straight from you. I am talking directly to our audience. Forget everything that you've heard. The issue is, was there a wrong? And the answer is yes. The questions about who, about what should it be done, that should be automatic once we answer the question that says, yes, we are going to pay reparations. Then once we get that answer to yes, then we go from there. And as I recall with the opening statements, 3 out of my 4 colleagues said that nobody should get paid unless there was this little piece or that little piece or that little trinket. You've got our black community jumping through hoops again, which is crazy after 400 years. I would like, if we were going to have an honest discussion, Adam, a direct, honest discussion, and not be scared about things, I'd like to hear you say, yes, I'm going to put reparations on the table, and then I'll meet you on education, Jack. Then I'll meet you on housing. Then I will meet you on the theft of the insurance policies. Then I will address those that were able to pull themselves up like I did after my history of slavery. Then I will address you on those issues. But until you say yes and agree that reparations are due and owed for one of the massive intergenerational theft of wealth and the harm and horror and the original sin that slavery is, then I'm not sure that we're talking at the same level. Which is why we're.
Can I be heard?
No, which is why we're in the lawyers then, because lawyers have different points of view.
Then I'm throwing a flag right now. I'm throwing my second flag.
And I'm cool, Adam, because right now I'm serving on you a bill of particulars, a petition, a complaint on behalf of the African American community saying that you, as a member of the United States of America, owe us reparations. Now, your turn, Adam.
Adam, you're up. And you can speak directly to the American public, by the way.
I
or
will
the
speak to
internet.
the American public because I want them to know the truth. Bill brings up Georgetown University, a university with admissions practices so exclusionary that very few African Americans are accepted. African Americans commit 50% of the murders, even though they're only 13% of the population. Bill wants to blame it on slavery. 95% of African Americans are killed by other African Americans. Bill wants to blame it on slavery. 75% of violent crime is committed by African Americans. Bill wants to blame it on slavery. 73% of children grow up in single-parent black families. Bill wants to blame it on slavery. I think that's a lot of nonsense. And black police officers kill black suspects at a rate equal to or greater than white police officers. Bill wants to blame it on slavery.
That's right.
There's a reason that there's a wealth gap. No,
Okay.
I didn't interrupt you.
Okay, go ahead.
I did not interrupt you. Bill, the wealth gap is not due to racism. This narrative about structural racism is nonsense. After the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, affirmative action, and hiring policies that favor African Americans over whites every day of the week. Tell me something. The problem is not racism. The problem in certain areas of the country is culture. And I'm not afraid to say it. Tell me something. Why is it that Nigerian Americans are so successful? Why is it that Asians are so successful? We don't blame slavery. We don't promote a victimhood mentality. And you cannot dispute these statistics. You won't address them because you're running away from precisely what you think you advocate for, and that's the fucking truth.
Okay, first of all, with regard to all of the affirmative action policies, your Supreme Court has been chipping away at them historically and consistently, and most recently, the United States Supreme Court with Texas. It began with Michigan and has run all the way through the gamut, and you know as well as I do, and it's intellectually dishonest of you, Adam, to sit there and say that that affirmative action has been a panacea, because you know full well that your original school of thought undermines each and every single advancement that has been achieved. The Voting Rights Act of 1964, the Housing Rights Act of 65 have all been gutted by your conservative Supreme Court, the very icons that you hold up and you want the rest of this nation to follow. The Supreme Court has systematically, and they're doing it now. Now, I find it striking and appalling from you, because when you talk about Roe v. Wade, just to bring up another issue, this Supreme Court is systematically eroding Roe v. Wade. And you see that, you acknowledge that intellectually, that that's exactly what they're doing. And you say, hey, listen, they're wrong at the conclusion, but they're wrong about the way they get it. Now, the point here is you cannot say affirmative action is there without recognizing that for the last 30 years, the Supreme Court has been undermining and narrowing affirmative action. It's an all-out assault. That's one. Two, the wealth gap you can define. Now, I'm not sure about you, but, you know, all those, the schools that you've attended to, you've gotten there on certain things, as I understand it, a scholarship here, a scholarship there. Perhaps, you know, your family was economically disadvantaged. You certainly understand the value that sometimes in society, those that have been disadvantaged through no fault of their own have a right to be compensated. This is no different. So why is it good for the athlete and suddenly somehow terroristic?
I just want to correct briefly your misrep. I am not a conservative. I am not a racist. What I am is someone who believes African Americans are every bit as smart and talented as anyone else. And your party and you are making them victims. And you will not address the facts that I address because you can't.
Oh, no. Actually,
that's the end of the story. And there's nothing left to say. Case closed.
I understand you believe it ends with that. And you see, that is the rub here. You know, it's as, you know, Malcolm X.
You Democrats have done a great job for African Americans. Unbelievable.
I understand. But you see, Malcolm X said once, when he was looking at this entire issue, that for years, the African American community has pleaded with the United States government to say, let us right this wrong together, until he concluded that, listen, you don't go plead your case to the guy that robbed you. You take the guy that robbed you to court. And in this case, this is an example of where we need to take the United States of America, as Malcolm X said, to the world court, to the international court, to the United Nations. Because clearly, Adam, with your school of thought, we will never get anywhere, because under your thinking, everything is done. It's like, oh, well, you know, and then they're just down there, and then they're unfortunate, and so what? And it's a big mistake, and it's too late. I don't believe America tells our people that anything is ever too late. And I don't believe we're too late to this, which is why we're having this open and honest discussion on
Nick, I need reparations for listening to this.
Well, I'm positive you do. And for our audience, just to let you know, we're going to be doing at the end of the show, this is the issue before the court. Should blacks be allowed reparations for past harms? And just like any court, we're going to put it to a vote and see what our den comes up with, because I think we're still somewhat of a democracy, even the court. But it's a very interesting issue. It doesn't seem to be very emotionally charged at all, so it seems pretty boring. But anyway, it is what it is out there when it comes to issues like this before the court. Guidry, since you're the voice of reason in the sea of unreasonableness, can you shed some more light on this particular issue, as you see that apparently Adam and Bill have counter positions here on this?
Well, after such an eloquent dialogue, or
Thank you, Guidry. I appreciate that.
Thank you, gentlemen. I can say that I do not support either of them. I think they are embodiment of the United States. You have pro and against, and there is nothing in the middle. And I think that's where the problem lays. I think that there is a need. There are cities, there are places in the United States that are not that advanced, that are still suffering the effects of the discriminatory practices that were effectuated by the government. And I think there is a lot of material that is archived that we can look into specifically for those places and for those group of people, and to really see and identify that, yes, they are still suffering the effects of such practice. And there I'm firm supporter of doing certain reparations, where we have nexus, where we can identify where we could get money, how we could fund it. It's very, very important. And where we could identify the directly affected people by that. I do not prescribe to reparations for all, cash for all. I do not think that would help, because it would not resolve the solution. As many people there are, as many understanding of reparations there are. For some people, it might be acknowledgement. For others, it would be apologize. For others, will be address. I'm all about redressing the harm, and not everyone in the United States who are black or who are descendants of black have been harmed by that. It's horrible. We need to acknowledge it, but we also need to resolve it rationally. We need to attack it in a rational manner. And as of now, I think we are not getting there. I'm very optimistic about the HR 40 bill that finally left the judiciary. And right now it's going for Congress for the vote. I think that we have to study what happened. We have to study the effects of slavery onto the United States. Unfortunately, for 32 years, we were not able to do so. But we need to do it not in the way Adam is advocating, and also not in the way Bill is advocating.
Well, then what are you advocating for?
Just a minute, Counselor. We're going to go to closing arguments now as we're winding down the session. We'll start with Jeff. Closing arguments, please, on this particular issue. And the issue before the court is quite simple. Should blacks be allowed reparations for past harm? Counselor Teicher, please.
To conclude, I want to quote a dead white guy, Theodore Roosevelt.
Perfect.
There is no room in this country for hyphenated Americans. When I refer to hyphenated Americans, I do not refer to naturalized Americans. Some of the very best Americans I have ever known were naturalized Americans, Americans born abroad. But a hyphenated American is not an American at all. Now, I don't go so far as to say that people can't immigrate from Mexico and bring their dances and their carne asada and whatever else they want to bring of that culture if they subscribe to the values. And we're not talking about immigration today. But what I'm saying is that hyphenating Americans and calling some African Americans and some Irish Americans and continuing to dig up old wounds is dividing us more than uniting us. I like the idea that the 14th Amendment stood for equality before the law, and the idea that the law is colorblind. And I know, we haven't yet completely realized Dr. King's dream. I also agree with what Adam said about fatherless homes. I don't know how he expects government policy to fix that, but it isn't. That doesn't only apply to the Black community; it applies to the rest of America as well, and it's an increasing problem. So, I hope we can get down to adopting some family values. I hope we can create an economy where everybody has a shot. And I hope we can create and reform a legal system so that everybody's treated equally and fairly, unlike what they did under the Clinton crime bill. And if anybody deserves reparations, it's the people who got thrown in prison over minor crack cocaine offenses that where white people walked free because they did the powder stuff.
Okay.
So anyway, that's my concluding argument. I
Thank you.
respect what Bill's saying. I just don't agree with it.
Thank you, Counselor. Closing arguments, Fernando Leal.
Yeah. It's funny that Bill and I are still having this argument 33 years later. I told him 33 years ago he lost his mind. I'm telling you now that you've lost your mind, I'm not paying you for squat. The bottom line is that you keep bringing up the intergenerational wealth gap and all this other nonsense. At the end of the day, you cannot prove that if they would have gotten 40 acres and a mule, that they would have been able to hold on to that property through the generations. It could have been possible that they would have lost it within a year of getting it, or within 10 years of getting it, and you're still in the same position you're in. It's like saying, hey, you know, if Darryl Strawberry and Doc Gooden would have became crack addicts and cocaine addicts, the Mets would have won 10 to 15 championships. The truth of the matter is that you will never, ever know. So to say that there's intergenerational wealth gap because they didn't get X, Y, and Z, it is a false argument, because you don't know. You can't pin it down. You can come up with all the BS numbers that you want. It still doesn't pin it down to whether they were actually going to hold on to the property and whether they were actually going to hold on to their money. There are plenty of people that are rich and then they're poor the following day. If you find me any one of these people that didn't get paid for their labor when they were sharecroppers, when they were slaves, fine. They should get paid, and they should get paid by the people that didn't pay them their salary. It's amazing to me that blacks can come from other countries that are far more racist than the United States is, because Latin America is far more racist than America is. There really are no opportunities for blacks in Latin America. They have to fight 10 times harder than those who are born here, who have opportunities and fail to take them. At some point, you got to turn your eyes inwards and start looking at what you're doing that's holding you back, not what everybody else is doing. It's nonsense.
Okay, closing argument, Skeedry Stonsonite, please, Counselor.
Well, I don't think that we should be distracted by what is happening in Latin America or Cuba or somewhere else. We need to focus on the United States. I think for us to resolve any kind of issues, such as reparations and slavery, effects of that, we need to be able to simplify it, to be able to understand it. If we're going to use blanket statement and say that everyone deserves something because of such a mistreatment that was, yes, I'll say, I agree, horrible, we are not going to get anywhere. We need to focus on our local communities. We need to focus on the past harm and connect it to the current disadvantage. It has to be felt. We have to be able to know what we are trying to redress. So if we going to focus on such a local address on this horrible effects of the slavery, my vote will be for reparations. If we're going to focus on federally extending the reparations, my vote would be no.
Closing arguments, Professor Lampero, please.
I have no idea what that means. Look, racism is despicable, and our history, including slavery, is absolutely abominable. But that doesn't explain why African Americans disproportionately commit murder. That doesn't explain why they disproportionately commit violent crime. It doesn't explain why they are disproportionately in single-parent families and prone to delinquency and failing out of schools. It just doesn't. And not a single person on this panel wants to address this. So I'll address the African American community. You're every bit as smart and powerful and creative as anyone in this world. You have a choice, and you can be absolutely as successful as anyone else. Don't let people make you victims. You're not. You're as good and wonderful as everyone else, and we should celebrate that and not celebrate the victimhood that Bill is trying to shovel on you.
Closing arguments, Honorable Bill Trezevant, please, before we call the question.
Oh, well, absolutely. And thank you, Nick, and to all of my colleagues. I really do appreciate the time that we've spent. I just want to address this fundamental issue to our audience. and that is this. I want you to remember two things. The question here before it is simply this. Is there a debt owed for the original sin of slavery? So first, did slavery occur? Was labor taken without compensation? Was there an injury? Yes, 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 yes. Therefore, there's a debt. Therefore, at least according to the issue that we have before us, there is a debt owed, and there is a debt that needs to be paid. Now, all of my colleagues, as they've gone through their arguments, and I'll just kind of categorize them without doing them a disservice, but rather putting them in the appropriate buckets. You have bucket number one, and that's to diminish. The arguments are to diminish. They say, well, you can't really say this person would have, achieved this had they gotten the 40 acres and the mule. Maybe they would have lost it. That diminishes the ultimate amount of the payment, but implicit in it, it acknowledges that there's a debt owed, which means we win on the argument that there is a debt owed and reparations should be paid. But more importantly, on that argument, along with the why can't you look inward and pull yourself up by your bootstraps argument, is another slippery slope argument for diminishment of the amount of the debt. And here is the rub. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I'm going to give you boots, 40 acres and a mule, but I never even gave you boots. So what strings or what bootstraps am I pulling up if I don't even have boots because I was never given boots to begin with? Absolutely right. It's all speculative. We don't know. We don't know if they would have kept it and built their own empire. The point here is there was a debt owed. It was understood back in 1860 with 40 acres and a mule because it was General Sherman that issued the order that said, we're going to pay you 40 acres and a mule. And here's a side note. While the United States government failed on that, you know what the United States government did do out in the West? They forced Native Americans to take in freed slaves and give them 40 acres and a mule. So those slaves, former slaves who lived on Indian reservations out west, actually got the 40 acres and a mule. But you can't say that, one, there's no debt owed, because there is. Two, you can't then turn around and say, well, we don't know what they would have done with it. Maybe they would have lost it, maybe so. Maybe they would have kept it, maybe so. But the debt is still there, it's still owed. That's an argument to diminish the amount. And then third, you say that we believe in America. America fundamentally is about healing. We're optimistic. We believe in a better tomorrow. When we see a wrong, we seek to do better. We think not of where we are, but where we ought to be. And part of where we ought to be is remembering where we've come and making sure that we fix that moving forward. Now, we can have the debate, and I will certainly give deference to the school of thought that Guidry comes from, which says maybe this is the right solution or that's the right solution. But the question before this panel is there a debt owed? There is a debt owed. And as soon as this panel acknowledges that there's a debt owed, I will meet Guidry at the table, roll up my sleeves, and then we will work out how much money, who gets what. I'll give Fernando, I'll buy him lunch out of my share of the reparations, and we'll go from there. But I conclude with the fact that to answer the principal question, there was a harm, there was an injury. Reparations are to recompense for that injury. Therefore, reparations are due and owing to Black Americans. And it's about time that we get about the business of doing what we should have done 400 years ago.
Okay, thank you, Counselor. We're going to call the question. The question before the court now is this: should Blacks be allowed reparations for past harm? Yes, no. Should we look at a case-by-case basis? Guidry, you're up. Let me unmute you. There you go.
I think it's clear that my stand is for case-by-case basis.
Thank you, Counselor. We'll go to Jeff Teichert. Jeff, your thoughts, your vote, please, Counselor.
Reparations for victims of the Clinton crime bill that went way too far. I'll consider that. Reparations for slavery, no, it's been too long.
Okay, we will now go to Fernando Leal. Fernando?
Yeah, the answer is no. There is no debt owed. Bill still owes me lunch no matter what he says. And as for the Clinton crime bill, I'm all for it because I grew up in a crack-infested neighborhood.
Okay, so is that a blanket no, or is it case by case, Counselor?
Oh, no, blanket no.
Blanket no. Okay, Adam
Blanket.
Lamparero, Yes, no, case by case, Counselor?
Culture? No, but yes to improving culture and communities and exposing the fallacy of systemic racism, white privilege, and all that nonsense.
Okay, and then our last but not least, Bill Trezevant. Bill.
Well, thank you, Nick. I think I have the pleasure of, announcing one, I'm a yes, but I think that I have two half yeses. So, I mean, I think we have two full yeses because Guidry was on a case-by-case basis. I'm counting that as a yes. And Jeff was on for certain portions of reparations, so that's a yes. And I say yes as a blanket. So I think that's a three. Nick, what are your numbers?
Well, I hope I got this one right on the boards here, Bill. Let's go point it. Okay, I'm looking at this, but let's just make sure this is right. Here we go. Looking at yes, 1, 2 case by case, and 1 no. So we basically have a pretty split panel. It looks that way.
Then I've done my job. I'm halfway there, Nick.
Not much I can do about that, Bill. You know?
Living on a prayer.
What can I tell you on a wing and a prayer? And with that, we're past the hour. Ooh, there were some comments that came in. Oh boy! Unfortunately, I missed some of the comments.
You know what you have to do? You got to land this plane safely, Nick.
Yeah, see, that's unfortunate. We're actually past our time, so we're actually gonna have to land the plane. We do want to thank everybody for coming to Lawyer's Den, and we'll see you next week on the Lawyer's Den, which I think is next Tuesday. Lawyer's Den. And Guidry goes, let's go look at something that took place 40 years ago. Who cares? Okay, that's political.